Thank you all for coming. Good afternoon. I'm Patty Katz, the president of Reach Out America. It's been a long time since we've all been together. As Genetta said before, March seems to feel like a few lifetimes ago. We hope that you and your families are doing well. We're so grateful to have this opportunity to kick off our 17th year as a vital organization that has been committed to our motto, which one of our co-founders, Fran Reed, had coined, to be doing things that are doable, measurable, and meaningful. We're very grateful for our membership and excited to have some new members taking action to help flip the Senate in swing states to blue and get this nightmare of a president and his unpatriotic administration out of office in November. These are very trying times. So many of us have lost loved ones or dear friends over the past 6 months. Although this has been a time of sorrow for so many, we seem to continue to embrace the resilience of life and move forward to do whatever we can to correct the horrible wrongs of our current administration. We crave to rise above the darkness we are subjected to on a daily basis. And as one of our goals of Reach Out America, I'm really proud to say we strive to protect the Constitution of what was once a great nation just a few years ago. You know, my father used to tell me 2 important things that I'd like to share today. 1, this too shall pass. And 2, always be aware of how fast things can change in a country. We unfortunately are living through grave change, but we will continue to fight together to recapture the heart and soul of America. We bear witness to the erosion of the Constitution and our rights on a daily basis. Egregious crimes that have been committed against immigrants and their families, shocking racial divide, violence and intolerance against Blacks and all peoples of color, revoking of rights for the LGBTQ community, the continued massive assault on the environment, the unrelenting destruction of our media and our legal system. And yet, despite these attempts at the intentional corrosion of our constitutional rights, this too shall pass. We shall prevail. The only way to correct these atrocious problems is to vote in November. Reach Out America is committing to do whatever we can to get people from all areas of this country to get out the vote. Letter and postcard writing, phone banking, and donating money. We are dedicated to this goal until the end of November. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the remarkable work that the Executive Board has been doing during this very difficult time. While we previously met once a month in person, we have now been meeting virtually every other week. Our actions have been many, impactful, and informative. This all takes a tremendous amount of time and effort, which the board of 11 of us have been doing on your behalf. I'd like to say a big thank you to Jeanette Frickholt, our Vice President and Secretary, who has been working tirelessly and sending out all of those emails, and also Sandy Sallet for her very important postcard campaign that she's been doing all on her own. So thank you both. We hope that you'll share our efforts with friends and family, ask them to join us in our actions going forward, and please drag everyone you know to the polls and help them get their absentee ballots to vote. Today, to kick off our very first webinar, we are fortunate to have a terrific speaker in Genetta Adams. At Reach Out America, we always joke that we're so lucky that we always find speakers that are so timely, and it's always such important issues. So just to let you know, at the end of this presentation, we will have time for questions and answers. Since this is a new format for all of us, just to let you know, once Janetta's finished with her presentation, you can look at the bottom of the screen and you'll see a Q and an A. Just press that button, and you could just write a question that will come to me and I will read it to Genetta. So I would now like to pass the virtual floor over to President Emeritus Rita Hall. Thank you all.
Hi. I got a little emotional when I saw Genetta. Okay. I did. Genetta Adams has a long time experience in journalism. She and I worked together at Newsday. She was the entertainment editor and I was her art director. Genetta approached all projects with deep knowledge and style, and she was terrific to work with. We both left Newsday years ago, carving out different paths, but we were reconnected via social media. I learned both that she was now editor of The Root and that The Root was a significant, entertaining, and trusted online publication about African American politics and culture. Further, I began to hear it widely mentioned in mainstream media. Jason Johnson, a frequent MSNBC contributor who delivers seamless and original comments on our present political climate, is a Root alum. Michael Herriot, an elegant writer and Root staffer, made headlines when he challenged Pete Buttigieg's record on race policy. And when Seth Meyers recently did an incisive parody on how patronizingly Black Americans are portrayed in Hollywood, the Root was quoted. I love that, by the way. In the years I helmed ROA, I planned programs long in advance, always with the trepidation that by the time speakers gave their presentation, their subject matter would no longer be relevant. But under the Trump presidency, never once did this problem arise. All issues are always crises in this administration. Genetta was supposed to speak in April when we had to shut down. She generously agreed to join us today. And the focus of the publication she helms, made more acute by the health and economic crisis, is even more urgent than it was then. Who could have predicted it? As Rachel Maddow always says, if I got anything wrong, correct me. With pride and gratitude, I give you Genetta Adams.
Well, I want to say thank you guys for the incredible introduction. I hope that I hope to live up to the selling of what you guys have already said. I appreciate the honor and I appreciate being asked to speak. I don't consider myself a great public speaker, and I always try to do these things as more of a conversation. I didn't prepare a speech. Like I said, I'm not a good speaker. I'm going to speak off the cuff and talk about sort of my political evolution during this time, because I think a lot of us have been sort of struggling with what's happening right now, and also looking at where we're going as a country. And I and our site have always sort of looked at these things in terms of what is happening to this country and what impact it will have on Black Americans, because as they say, when America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And so that has been borne out in ways this year, in ways that we couldn't imagine. And I want to go back to 2016 when Trump was elected. And I remember sort of in our first sort of reaction during his inauguration on the Root, we actually wrote an obituary for America and ran a black bar. We had a full page across that was just a black bar, and that was basically an obituary for America, and it was written by Michael Herriot, and it was we thought that this would be dark days for America. I don't think we saw how dark it was really going to get. But we knew that the rise of Donald Trump was a harbinger of things to come. But I think in my mind, I was hoping that he would be so inept that he wouldn't do as much harm. And I was actually more concerned about the people around him who had agendas, people like the Stephen Millers and the Stephen Bannons, who came in with agendas and knew what they wanted to do and were clearly smarter than him and knew how to enact these horrible policies. And I think just year after year after year, from 2017 when he took office and till now, or at least until 2019, I sort of naively thought if we could just get through, perhaps there will be, it won't be so bad. It won't be so horrible. I still sort of naively held on to the idea that perhaps it won't be so badly. And I got a glimmer of hope in 2018 when we saw this wave of progressive politicians coming in, the AOCs, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley, and even Lauren Underwood in Illinois, who doesn't get a lot of mention, who turned a red district blue in Illinois. And these progressive women who came in, and I felt like I had been waiting for these women my entire voting life, because it always felt like the Republicans were running to be as far right as possible, to the point where we practically have cross burnings at the White House right now. And I was looking for a group of politicians to pull us back. And so I got a glimmer of hope in 2018 when those women were elected, and we kept electing more and more progressives. And even this past primary, we saw in New York, we saw Jamal Bowman knock out Elliot Ingle, and we saw Mondaire Jones do a similar thing in upstate. So I was a little more optimistic. And then, of course, and we were in the middle of the presidential primaries, and our site had been sort of covering the primaries in the sense that we were rooting for the progressives, obviously. I think if you read our site, you would know. I think Damon Young of Very Smart Brothers wrote a piece that basically said Joe Biden is the only person who knows he's not going to be president, because we did not, we were not on Team Biden, let's just say that. And so, and I had even said at that point that if Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee, I was going to change my party affiliation to independent, because I had been fed up with the establishment of the Democratic Party and was annoyed that Nancy Pelosi and others were kind of giving AOC and the squad a hard time about their beliefs. And I thought, these guys are the future of the party, and you need to get on board, because they're the future. They're going to, if you look at survey after survey after survey, Americans believe in progressive politics. The policies that the progressive policies. It's the politics that gets everything lost in the sauce. I mean, people support a working minimum wage. They support healthcare for all. They support, the climate change policies. So many of the progressive policies that these groups were talking about were things that Americans actually support. We just haven't been able to get over the political hurdle of explaining to folks how this stuff will help them. And so I was not Team Biden personally, and was basically, sort of saying, I'm going to change my party affiliation and become an independent, because I was over the Democratic Party. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and the pandemic hit, and a lot of things began to happen, as you saw, that Black folks were hit hardest. Black and brown people, the Black community, brown communities, older folks were being devastated by this disease, where it really sort of became a crisis, a personal crisis for me. I mean, so many things happened with all the policies that Trump was passing that did not personally affect me. I mean, they were horrible. I mean, the immigration policies were horrible. The long-term effects of his rolling back regulations on the environment, they're going to have devastating effects on the future generations. But it was sort of like, this guy is horrible, we need to get him out of here. But this, the COVID-19, the coronavirus, the pandemic has really sort of hit home. And I've been fortunate that no one in my family has gotten sick, but I've had friends who've gotten sick and ill, and they've been fine. And so I sort of had to recalibrate a bit about how I thought about this election. And I think a lot of the writers on our staff were still sort of struggling with this idea that can Joe Biden do what he needs to do to win the presidency and when it's over? And, for me personally, I did not change my party affiliation when he became the Democratic nominee. And I was buoyed by the fact that he chose Kamala. I was hoping he would choose Stacey, because Stacey Abrams, I think, is definitely one of the more savvier politicians. She's smart. She's brilliant. I think, if nothing else, she should be put in charge of the DNC to show them how to win an election, because in theory, I believe she is the governor of Georgia, despite what the tallies say, because we've seen evidence that shows that the election was basically stolen from her. So, but he chose Kamala, and I think that these historic firsts have kind of given me, the historic first, her nomination has kind of given me a little bit of hope. And I think I even tweeted out when she was named, it's like I kind of saw a light at the end of the tunnel. But I still feel, though, that if Joe Biden wins, I'm not going to necessarily be happy. I think I'll be relieved more than anything. And I think that relief rests in the idea that there will be somebody who is reasonable running the country and who can in some ways be swayed. And I think that is going to be the key thing for me if Joe Biden becomes the president, because there are so many, his background and his history, he is kind of an architect to some degree of some of the racial strife we've been having currently. You know, everyone knows about his writing the crime bill, but there were so many other aspects of his war on drugs and his policies that have ingrained so many things that have caused some of the racial injustices within America. And he has been the architect of that. And so the question that gets raised is, will he be able to overcome, will he be able to change? Can you teach an old dog new tricks? And that was one of the points. We were talking about the Atlantic article that dropped last night from Adam Soar, who brilliantly argues the case that it's not 1968 that is the parallel to this sort of massive uprising that we've been having. It's 1868 and Reconstruction, and how it was the demagogue of a president combined with the Southern oppression of the newly emancipated slaves that finally led the white Northerners to react and enact some bold Reconstruction legislation. And so he makes this parallel that in this time we have a very similar opportunity to do something where we can begin to reshape the country and make it more equitable and more a true republic and a true democracy for everyone. And he raises the issue of the political will of white folks. And that's what this boils down to. It's not just a matter of civil equality, it's also about economic justice, which was the piece that was missing in the Reconstruction era. And that's where we are today, where we have, right now we've seen folks clamoring for reform around the police department. We've seen activism around, defund the police. And to some folks who had not been hearing that, that sounds absolutely radical. Defund the police, oh my God, what does that mean? But if you've been in these circles for a while, you would have heard those ideas of, taking money and providing better social services. But that's only part of the equation to true equality. And the point that Adam makes in this article is that there needs to be economic justice paired with that. Otherwise, we're just going to find ourselves back in the same place, because as we saw through Reconstruction, we got the amendment, the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment. Even if you go forward and fast forward to the 60s, we got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but we still haven't gotten full equality. And that goes back to the idea of how do we get economic justice? And one of the things people talk about is reparations. And every time people hear reparations, like defund the police, it becomes this scare word that, people think, or white people, I should say specifically, think that it's just going to be Black folks lining up at the White House to get free checks. And really what has been called for is a study, a commission on how do we make amends on our past, because that is the thing that this country has never really reckoned with, is dealing with the legacy of slavery, dealing with the legacy of Jim Crow. The Tulsa race massacre has become a very well-known story now, thanks to a TV show. The Watchmen, if you ever saw that show, people are talking about the Tulsa Massacre. Many people didn't even know that history of this thriving Black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was separate and apart from white America because they had deemed it so. Jim Crow said, whatever, be over here. And Black folks said, okay, well, we're going to make the best of it. We're going to create our own businesses. We're going to have our own doctors. We're going to have our own store. And one racial incident, and it was burned to the ground over 3 days. And so whenever there has been Black folks trying to strive up, there's always been something, strive up economically, there's always been something that's come along to knock them back down. And I think that America still needs to reckon with that issue. And how do you close that wealth gap? Because the wealth gap, we're a capitalist country. Money is, finance and money matters, and, wealth matters to folks. And that's how you build an equitable society. And I think that as you look at what's happening now with COVID-19 and the reports that 40% of Black businesses are going to be shut down permanently, this is a devastating time for Black America. And so whoever gets elected, and I pray to God it is Joe Biden, and not Donald Trump, because those issues will not be addressed. Whoever gets elected is going to have to reckon with this. It's not just going to be, you know, we're not going to wake up on November 4th and everything is going to be better. The real work is going to begin, you know, on January 20th or whatever the inauguration is of 2021. If whoever is the president, and again, if it's Joe Biden, I hope it's Joe Biden. If Joe Biden is the president, he's going to have a lot of work to do. And I think that, you know, our role in this is just making sure that we keep Joe Biden's feet to the fire, because that's literally what, you know, that's what, you know, I'm not an activist. I'm not, I did protest in college, but I feel like I'm better suited for putting stories out and telling stories, because I do think there's a huge information gap between what Black folks go through and what white folks know what we go through. And I think that's what's been so compelling about this year, is that, you know, we've seen videos of, you know, police shootings and those type of things, but somehow the murder of George Floyd struck a chord with folks. And I think the reason why it struck a chord was that, you know, every time we had a video of a cop killing a Black man, it was, well, they feared for their lives and they would get away with it. But here was a police officer casually leaning on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with his hands in his pocket, knowing full well that he was being videotaped, without fear. He actually acted without fear of reprisal. And I think that was the thing that was most shocking for white America, was to see how boldly this man was willing to kill another man who was unarmed and in handcuffs. And even though activists and Black folks have been saying this has been going on for a while, you know, we've had this Rodney King, we've had, you know, Tamir Rice and John Crawford and Oscar Grant and all these folks we've seen on video. I think it was the casualness with the way that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd on camera without fear of reprisal. He didn't expect to get punished because he didn't think he would. And I think that really awakened in folks this idea that perhaps Black America is right about the police. And so we've seen this amazing moment that Adams sort of captures in his piece, and this sort of anti-racism wave of perhaps, you know, the chance to change. And I think change America and move us forward in a way that's going to bring true equity to America. But there's also the risk, because at some point, just as in Reconstruction, white America grew alarmed at some of the proposals, or they grew complacent. You know, once some of the bills were passed, people felt like, okay, well, these things are better now. And I think we had a little bit of that after the election of Barack Obama, where people felt like, hey, we've elected a Black president, so things have got to be better now. And Black folks were like, no, things are not better now. And so I think that there is a realization among white America that things are not as they should be. And that I think that's the critical thing here, is that, you know, this is not a problem that's going to be solved by Black America. This is a problem that's going to be solved with white America in hand, because we can't change all the rules and the laws. We can't vote out all of the politicians that need to be voted out of office. We can't, you know, as much as I love the squad and as much as I love the progressive politicians who've been elected, they can't do it alone. And it's going to take a lot of buy-in from white America. And I think that's the question that we're going to have to look to going forward, is what is white America willing to do to help bring about real, not just social justice, but economic justice? Because that's the key part of this that's been missing for the last several hundred years in our country. And so, while I've had some very dark days during this time, it's been basically 6 months. It seems like 6 years. I do feel that there is the possibility of real change if we do our job in November and elect Joe Biden. He is not my first choice. He wasn't even on my second choice. He wasn't even my third choice. He was none of my choices, period. But I do think the combination of him and Kamala together I think represents an opportunity for us to begin to really make some real changes. And he said some very promising things. He's talked about the history and how we've talked the talk and we need to move, we need to go beyond. And so the question is can he do this? If he gets the Senate and the House, perhaps, I would be interested to see what he's going to do if he gets both the House, both chambers of Congress. I do think that that's one part of it. That's not enough because a lot of these things also are on the local and state level. And so there's still a lot of work to do, but I do think a lot of it is going to depend on how much of a buy-in we can get with white America. And right now, everyone seems to be open. We've had, there have been protests going on since the George Floyd murder. And, the only time we see it on the news, though, is when there's chaos. And so that's an unfortunate part of that coverage. But the reality is that we've had sustained protests in this country of a multicultural protest. And I do think that a smart politician should see this as a moment to give them the political will to make that change while everyone is so open to the idea of making changes. And yes, there's going to be some scary policies like defund the police or abolish the police or reparations discussions. These are all things that are going to be coming out, and there's going to be some recoil because Trump dug up a lot of garbage. I mean, he didn't create racism, but he definitely allowed people to express it more freely in ways that we've never seen before. And so that's going to be a huge fight because there's going to be people who are going to fight every decision, every measure, every discussion that gives the impression that it's helping Black America more than it's helping all Americans. And so that's going to be the challenge that Joe Biden faces and Kamala faces as well. And they both are moderates. They're not progressives. And I know they've tried to, Kamala's tried to recast herself as such, but she has had, she has a history as a prosecutor of not necessarily doing the right things, but she has made changes that I think gives me hope that they will be willing to do the right thing. And so I think we as a news organization, our job is to keep our foot on their neck, so to speak, to keep them doing the right thing. One of the things that we're trying to do is, interview Joe Biden. He's been dodging us. And so we're trying to get him to talk to us because we've talked to everyone. We've had, if you go back on our site, you'll see that we talked to Kamala. She's given one of the more longer, deeper discussions about race and justice on any site, and that was at our site. So we had that interview with her. We've talked to Cory Booker. Obviously, we talked to Pete Buttigieg, as Rita mentioned, after Michael called him a lying MFer. One of the all-time great stories. And I have to say, I'm Michael's editor, so whenever he writes something, I'm like, you're trying to get me fired? And I was like, nah. I mean, it's not going to get me fired, but it's great because I love working at the Root so much because we can write headlines like that and call a thing and call people out. And so I think that our role as a site and my role as the managing editor of the site is to make sure we're keeping the politicians' feet to the fire because Joe Biden is going to have a huge hurdle. It's not going to be a very easy thing if he's elected and everything's going to be roses. I'm really interested to see how he unrolls a lot of these programs. Today, he's supposed to be announcing his economic plan to rebuild America. And I'm going to read that closely and see how he talks about that and some of the things he's proposing, because that's going to be critical. The economic part of this is going to be critical because we have so many people hurting, not just Black folks, but just across America. And so that's going to be a critical piece to that puzzle. And it's also going to be the thing, I'm still surprised if you look at polls, how people say Donald Trump can handle the economy better than Joe Biden. And it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. I'm like, are you guys not living in America right now? Do you understand that he has been the reason the economy has crashed because he refused to acknowledge the coronavirus and do anything to stop it? And so I'm always still stunned, still naively so, about how people think that that Donald Trump can handle that better than most folks. So I think, like I said, looking forward to the future, looking forward to November. Obviously, we're talking about our election coverage later today, and then also talking about how we're going to do more interviews with politicians. We've been doing a lot of things. One of the things that one of our writers, Terrell Starr, who's our political reporter, who's been talking to one of the mandates I gave him was, I don't care about the national, I don't care about, let's go do local folks, let's do a lot of state folks, let's do a lot of, Black folks who are running in these campaigns that people don't know about, because that's where a lot of those things happen, the state and the local level. And so I'm interested in telling those stories and bringing light to those stories, because that's where those battles are really going to lie. And so that's kind of, like I said, I won't be celebrating when Joe Biden wins, but I will be relieved, because I do believe that's an opportunity for us as a country to move forward. And I think there's an opportunity with this racial justice movement that's happening. There's an opportunity for us to try to make real sustained and lasting change, which has been missing in all the policies of the past. And so that's kind of my story. I'm going to stop talking now, because I feel like I've been talking too much.
That was great.
Perfect.
Genetta, it was just great. I don't know why you were worried about this format. You did an amazing job. We do have a lot of questions.
Okay. Yeah, I saw them popping up. So I was like, oh,
yeah,
start
right.
talking.
It's great.
People have questions.
I'm going to start with Susan Davis. She said, couldn't agree with you more, Genetta, about the role of white America to bring about social justice. Assuming Biden-Harris win and we flip the Senate, of course, big if, what is your view on the House bill to set up a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission, and the one on reparations? And I just wanted to add, I was listening to Kamala Harris about the LIFT Act that she's talking about. So I just wanted to throw that into Susan's question. Hopefully, Susan, you don't mind.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think anything that the reparations and anything, the LIFT Act, there's also the BREATHE Act, which is the police reform. I think any of those things, if they get brought to the floor, I think are going to be things that are going to be helpful to the cause. I do hope that they listen to activists, though. What tends to happen in these things is that everybody kind of throws in all their things, and Republicans get their thing, and back deals are made and things are changed and altered. And I do think that those type of proposals, I would love for them. I mean, the fact that they're could potentially be on the floor and being discussed, I think would be an amazing thing for this country. And for reparations, in terms of I would love for us to do a commission on reparations. I think, that's been something that's been proposed a number of times, from going all the way back to John Conyers, who was the original proposer, to last year when Ayanna Pressley proposed something similar. And I think Corey and Kamala did something similar in the Senate. I think that economic justice is really one of the key things. I think beyond police reform, because obviously police reform is necessary. I think that there are just too many cases of police officers getting away with literal murder because of qualified immunity, because of the way the laws have been written that gives them the benefit of the doubt in ways that regular Americans don't get. I do think that if we focus on the economic pieces of those things, I think that's going to be very critical for helping us move forward.
Great. I have a question from Harriet Becker. I love this question. We're all happy that Black Lives Matter has the total support of the NBA. However, only 20% of the players are registered to vote. How do we motivate them to register and vote?
Well, I think that question was sent to me in advance, and I actually had to look that up because I had not heard that stat. And I think that stat came out of when the Milwaukee Bucks held that strike, and they said they weren't going to play the games. And I think the idea of motivating them to vote, I think the fact that 20% said they voted in the last election, I think that's not a firm number, but even if it were, I think the thing to remember is that their season happens in the middle of election season. I mean, they play from October through the summer. And so if you're on the road, and I'm not trying to make excuses, I can see how the case can be made where you have multiple teams traveling multiple states over, every 3 days, they're in a different place. And it becomes almost impossible. You can say, well, absentee ballots, and that's true. You can do all that. And I think that's one of the things that came out of that discussion. I mean, if you look back at that conversation when they were striking, they talked about that very fact, that they do need to walk the walk the way they talk the talk. And I think the fact that they're now in this bubble situation where they're kind of stuck in Florida in Disney World, I think you're going to see a much higher voting situation there because they are stuck in one place and they're not traveling around the country. And I do think also that the notion that they're doing, which is they're pushing NBA owners to open up the stadiums and arenas for voting registration and for places for people to go vote, I think is very critical. I think it's less important about, I think voting is important, obviously, and I think it's less important about the numbers of guys who vote and what they're doing with their power and their ability. I mean, when they postponed those games and held that strike, that was a watershed moment because you'd never seen athletes basically say, you do not get our labor without giving us something in return. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to use that power, whether it's having, like I said, having arenas opened as polling stations and all that type of stuff, and speaking out on racial injustice. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't think they need to be motivated. I think the question is can we put mechanisms in place to help them vote as they're moving around the world? And I think they're going to do that.
Okay, that's great. In this line, there's another question that sort of feeds into it. It's from an anonymous attendee. It says, I love the route. Thank you for your leadership and excellent reporting. What is working best to register and turn out a large vote? What kind of electoral coverage are you planning?
Well, that's the discussion that we're having. I mean, we've done, Michael Harriot did a great piece last week on how to overcome voter suppression, because for Black folks, it's always been about voter suppression. It's it's never been about, turn out the vote. They always say, like they talk about 2016 and how Black voting went down after the election of Barack Obama. And that very well may be true, but what also was true was that we had the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And the minute that the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, the key provision, we saw states immediately start enacting voter ID laws and purging voter rolls in a way that we've never seen before. So I think that Black voter turnout has been sort of miscast as well. They didn't have a Black guy on the ballot, but the reality is that states have been moving and acting in ways to suppress the vote. And so our attack has always been, how do we overcome the suppressing of the vote? When Stacey Abrams was going through her historic run, we wrote story after story after story about Brian Kemp. We called him the Wizard of Voter Suppression because his history was so horrible in terms of removing Black voters specifically. And in fact, there was just a report, I believe it was last week, where 200,000 voters have been purged from the Georgia rolls over a certain amount of time. And so think about that, 200,000 voters purged from the rolls. Stacey Abrams lost by 55,000 votes. So imagine if those 200,000 folks, Black folks, had been allowed to vote. And so this is the type of things we're talking about. We're talking about, it's never really been about Black voter turnout. It's always been about voter suppression. It's always been about felon rights. I have a cousin who doesn't vote because he went to jail and he went to prison and he thinks he can't vote. And I said, you should check because the rules have changed. And so these are the things that we talk about because these are the realities that we face. It's never been about getting Black folks to vote. It's about giving them the avenue to vote. There was in that same study where they talked about 200,000 people being purged. It talked about the amount of time, and it took hours. Like if in Black community, Black polling stations, 6 to 7 hours to vote. In white communities, 30 minutes. So imagine if you have to work and you don't have time to stand in line for 6 hours. And so this is why things like, a national holiday for election day is key, because people need that time off that day to go vote, because so many states are putting barriers up. They've closed polling stations. There was a famous story about the polling station that was open in the police department in Jefferson County, and I believe it was Alabama or somewhere. I can't remember what southern state it was, but there are all these sort of tactics that are being done to suppress the vote. And that's really what it's about, is kind of calling attention to those situations and then calling them out and saying, this is what happened when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. And so we need to, there's a proposal in Congress to I think they call it the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to restore those provisions that cause so much of this chaos around voting and voter suppression and voter IDs and the purging of voter rolls. And so those are things that we're talking about to try to get those things moved forward, because that's really what's happening when it comes to Black voters. So.
Right. It's my understanding that there's a lot of the higher up Democrats, they're really working with a lot of lawyers in this election to really work on, stopping as much voter suppression as possible. I totally agree with what you're saying. So that, I spoke to somebody that's, super delegate, and that's what he was informing me, like, don't worry, we're really working hard over here with a million lawyers. So that being said, people make donations to the Democrats because they need the money for all the law that they're really trying to go all around the country. There's so much going on. It's really a nightmare. Right. So anyway, I have Mer Levy asked, I'm somewhere between a moderate and a liberal, and I still believe education is the key to economic success. How do you feel about reparations starting with scholarships to higher education and help at the lower levels of education by improving integrated schools, by hiring top quality teachers, not as hard to identify as people think?
Yeah,
that's her question.
I think obviously as the first college graduate in my family, I'm definitely a proponent of college education, and I kind of led the path, and I've had cousins after me go on to get PhDs and MDs. And so I agree that education is important, but I think we also have to look at how education is funded in this country. We fund education through property taxes in this country. And as we know, redlining, one of the federal government programs from the 50s and the 30s and 50s, that has decimated, redlining pushed Black folks into a certain area of the, certain neighborhoods, and allow Black folks only to live in certain places. And so property values for Black folks have been historically low, and this is how we fund our education system. So that explains a lot. So I think it has to not just be about scholarships, and that's a great idea. I think that's a start, but I do think we have to begin looking at how we fund education in this country truly, because I don't think that it should be the duty of organizations to present scholarships to fund education. I think that this country should fund education, and I think they should fund it equally, and I think they should fund it fairly. And as long as we're using the property tax as a base to fund education, we're never going to have equality. So that's something that has to be looked at more fully. And I'm not an expert on that, and I can't speak to that, but I do know that the way we fund education now is horrific. And I think that we need to begin looking. That's just one of the issues that we should put on the table when Joe Biden is president. That's something that I think is critical, because I believe in education. Trust me, I do. It's saved my life in more ways than one. So yes, I'm a big proponent of it.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see. Do you think this is from Rita. Do you think the strong white support for Black Lives Matter shown during protests will last?
I think that, well, I don't know what white folks are going to do. They're unpredictable. That's what I'm saying. I'm just gonna say that I know we don't know what white people.
I don't know why I'm asking you.
I mean, I'm just gonna say, as much as I am an expert on white people, I'm not that much of an expert on white people. But I do think that they're obviously very critical to how we move forward as a country, because like I said, there are not enough Black people in America to enact the changes that we need. We're 12% of the population. I mean, that's a fact. That's not changing. And so what can 12% of the population do if the majority of the population says we don't care? And so the fact that they care now is important. And I do think, again, it goes back to what Adam wrote in his piece, is like, we have a moment. There is a moment now where people are emboldened, they feel empowered, and they're acting because they do recognize that racial injustice is a real thing. And so that's why it's important for Joe Biden, when he's elected, to strike while he has the political motivation of these groups of white folks who are saying we want change. And the question becomes, is how much change are they willing to fight for? Because as Adam points out, civil justice, we've had those, we've passed, the Civil Rights Act, we've passed various laws to make those changes, but the economic part of it, that's missing. And so that's the question we have to figure out, is how much are white folks willing to fight for real economic justice for Black folks, for people of color, for marginalized communities? It's not just Black folks who are going through this, obviously. We have a lot of communities who are struggling economically because of the systemic racism that exists in our country. So the question really is I don't know. I don't know how is it going to last. I think it really depends on what the appetite for white people and what they are willing to fight for. How much are they? I mean, we saw that they're willing to stand in the street and risk getting killed. I mean, we saw Heather Heyer get killed in 2017 in Charlottesville. We've seen 2 protesters get killed in Kenosha. So how much are they willing to give is the question. That's a question for white America. That's the question we're struggling with, is right. What are they going to do?
Yeah, I have to say, just personally, I think over the past 6 months, I've shifted so much and had such a greater understanding of what's going on as far as Black America, which, being, the white, I never be able to walk in your shoes. But there's definitely been a shift for me. And I used to think about, well, when I heard Kamala Harris talking about reparations, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I really need to go deep and figure it out. And I realized that, it's so important. I totally get it. Reading that article that you sent last night, just sort of stamped it home. That really is the last part. And I really think, just if I take myself into account, I'm not saying that I represent all white people, because I certainly don't. I really don't, trust me. However, if I know that the shift that I've made, because suddenly I realize that it's absolutely vital, and it's sort of the only, it seems to me the fair's fair at this point. I mean, so many white people have been, elevated to riches over the years at the expense of lives and on the backs of people who were slaves. And it's just, and being Jewish, I understand on the other end with what happened with the Holocaust. And, I just totally get it. So I think that me thinking, I'm just looking at myself and saying, well, I shifted and something has happened. And I think what you were saying before about George Floyd and his death, and watching how the policeman had absolutely no sense of like anything was ever going to happen. I think, we keep seeing this more and more, and it's just, it's absurd. It's just, it's enough is enough. So, I think we might, to answer Rita's question in a very long way, I just think there might be this great opportunity right now.
And I think too, as I said to you before we actually went, live here, was that, I thought I knew stuff, and then I read with the account that you told me to read, us to read from the Atlantic and other things like that, how horrible it's actually been for 400 years. I thought it was like kind of horrible,
Right.
but it was like an epiphany in me. You know, it made me weep. Who cares that I'm crying? But the point is, I don't think I actually inside myself understood the degree to how bad this was. And I think that's true. That's not just me. That's true of so many other people as we see, you know, cops with their knees on people's necks. I don't think we got it. I really don't think we got it. And I remember, you know, just briefly, there was a colleague that I worked with at Newsday, you know, a Black woman. She was a business editor, and she would tell me these things, and I would say, you know, incidents that happened to her. And I'm saying, well, why don't you, you know, go to 60 Minutes? She said, what country do you think we're living in? I was so, you know, I'm so oblivious. A well-meaning person who I thought I knew stuff, and I know nothing. You know, so I think it's as you say, an important moment for us, at the very least, to learn what we didn't know.
Great. Okay, I have another question from Nina. Nina Gordon, how can we mobilize and energize young Black voters who may see Biden as too centralist?
Yeah, that's a
Centrist,
tough question, because I wasn't, I mean, the thing that compelled me, because as I said, I was going to change my party affiliation and I wasn't going to vote for Joe Biden. And I had the luxury of living in New York. I was going to leave that part of my ballot blank because honestly, I didn't think, you know, given his history and given, you know, his role as the architecture of some of the many policies that have affected Black America, I was not a fan. And so you know, what is the answer? I think, you know, for me at this moment, I am a one issue voter, which is this COVID-19 represents a real and present threat to not just everyone, but specifically Black and brown people and my relatives. My mother's 73. I have an aunt who has lupus. I have, you know, relatives who have pre-existing conditions. I have a pre-existing condition. And so these are things that literally threaten my life in ways that had never been before. And when you have Trump stoking the racism, that also is a direct threat to my life and people who look like me. I worry about my cousins and my uncles and relatives who live in California every day. You know, the fact that cops meet, you know, their encounters with police could be horrifically. I worry about those all the time. And so, you know, how do you motivate folks? I think that if you look at how the economy is right now, if you look at what's happening with COVID, I think that is, if that's not enough to motivate folks, you know, if you look at young Black folks who may be trying to go back to college, and we're seeing the rise of all these COVID cases because universities are attempting to make these kids go back to school in a very unrealistic environment. I think you have to make it, I think things that make it real for them. And I think that's going to be the motivating factor, because so most of the time when we're in the middle of an election, some of these things seem so abstract and sort of like, oh yeah, well, you know, I don't really care about, you know, what's happening, whatever. But I think the things are so pressing right now. There are real dangers that exist for all of us, not just not young Black folks, but for all Americans. And I think that I think we could actually see a huge wave of young voters in a way that we didn't before, because I think they recognize that, you know, they're the canaries in the coal mine. They're being pushed to go back to college, or they couldn't get a job this summer because the economy was so horrible. So I think they, if we show them that, hey, who you vote for matters, how you vote matters, I think that could be a motivating factor. Because yeah, they're one of the most unreliable voting blocs in America. But I think this time right now, with everything that's going on, I think that I think we could see a real uplift in the number of voters, young voters this year.
I hope you're right. That would be fantastic. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question. What is your understanding about the links between Black Lives Matter and Antifa? Who's behind the media hyped violence and looting during protests?
That's an interesting question.
Interesting question, right?
It's an interesting question. I think, you know, this idea of Antifa, which I think of as a joke, I think we're all anti-fascists. Like, let's be real about that. You know, I don't know what Antifa is. This is the boogeyman created by the conservative media to scare folks. But, you know, our grandfathers who fought in World War II were Antifa. I mean, they were the original Antifa, if we want to be real about it. And so this idea that, you know, and the people who are, I think those are two separate things. I think, you know, when we talk about Antifa and we talk about the people who are disrupting, I think those are two different groups. I think there are bad actors whenever there are right. Several bad actors whenever it comes to movements to peacefully protest. There's going to be a couple of rabble rousers who come in specifically, and if you look at it, you'll see a lot of those folks are on the right. You know, the Boogaloo Boys or whatever they're called. They're not getting nearly enough attention, and they've actually killed people. When Mike Pence talked about one of the police officers who had been killed, he failed to mention that he was killed by a right-wing group from the Boogaloo Boys. That was a right-wing, alt-right guy who was a suspect. It wasn't Antifa. Antifa, as far as I know, with the exception of, I will say that the guy who killed the person in Portland, he claims to be Antifa. But what is Antifa really? If we're fighting against fascism, it's a thing. It's a boogeyman, I think. And I think that we don't really get too mired in it. We kind of mock it a bit because, like I said, we're all anti-fascist. We're all against fascism. And so what that idea means is been sort of mischaracterized and maligned in a way because the Republicans need a boogeyman, because they can't turn Joe Biden into a boogeyman. They're trying to turn him into a boogeyman. They're trying to make him seem like a puppet of the radical left. But that's one of the more laughable things, is that he's not a puppet of the radical left, because he's never been a puppet. He's as centrist as they come. And so it's hilarious when they're trying to do this. But unfortunately, there's a section of the population who will buy into it because Fox News is churning out, all Fox News showed when Trump was talking about Portland was the violence. It's like you would have thought that the entire city of Portland was on fire, but really it was just a block. Downtown Portland. And if you go to Portland today, you'll be perfectly fine to walk around. But, the way Fox News was portraying it is that, and the way Trump portrays it is that cities are burning. He even says New York is out of control. And I'm like, dude, we're just trying to eat indoors. We're trying to go back to getting in bars. What are you talking about? New York is on fire. Like, it's crazy. But this is the stuff that the right has kind of stoked up to create this narrative of a boogeyman, these scary people. I will gladly wear the banner of Antifa because I'm definitely against fascism in this country. And so we don't get too caught up in the sort of, we mock those things on the right because it's nonsense. It's basically nonsense. So.
Okay. Great, thank you. Can I put one more question? We just got a late question. I think it's a really good one.
100%.
Andrea Katz says, I think it's easy for all of us to be talking about what to do with elections, et cetera, but how do we actually bring communities together in the day-to-day, especially with COVID now? We often live in very separate communities and don't make efforts to bring ourselves together.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think things like this, I think the events like this are very important. I mean, that's why I wanted to do it, because I do feel like we all need to talk to each other more. I think, as Rita said, she's, always kind of shocked to learn more, and she didn't know what she knows. And trust me, I don't know what I don't know. There's plenty of things I don't know. And I think that's why it's important to have these conversations with each other. I think, forming committees. I sort of think back to what happened in Crown Heights in the 90s. Remember, there was a big incident when a boy was killed by a Rebbe's car, and there was this big, uprising of violence and killing. And the thing that came out of that were these organizations that got together, Black and Jewish, and they got together and they started having regular meetings. And that was kind of how they turned the corner on those moments. And I think that I think there are, I don't know how we get the crazy white folks who are anti-masks, anti-wearing a mask, who are in lockstep with the president. I don't know. I think those people may be lost. I don't know. But I do think that there are still enough white folks, reasonable white folks, who can be brought into the fold if they're willing to be brought into the fold. But I think it takes conversations. I think it takes a willingness to go out and talk to those folks. And so I think events like this are important. I think the more of these things that are done in individual communities where there are problems, and you'll see those things. I mean, those things are happening. They do happen in places like Chicago, and they are happening in places in the South. But right now, everyone's, the president has everyone so out of their head that it's kind of hard to get people to listen to each other. So I think, depending on what happens in November, I think there will be more opportunity for healing. I think, whatever proposals Biden-Harris comes up with, I think is going to be important. But I do think that the healing has to start on a local level. It has to start on the ground. And so, and I think that those things will happen if Trump is voted out of office. I don't know what will happen if he is reelected.
Oh God.
Yeah, right. I think that's the big fear. Right. Yeah. That's the big fear, and that's the big worry. But I do think we have to entertain that possibility, if only to keep us motivated to keep fighting. Because if we look at the polls and see Joe Biden is up by 10 points, I don't trust the polls. I don't care. We can't rely on that. We can't. And I wish that the media, to some degree, the mainstream media, would stop covering that horse race aspect of it, because it kind of lulls people into Joe Biden is up by 10 points. This is great. I don't really have to do anything. There's not that much work to be done. It's like, no, you have to act as if Joe Biden is going to lose, because that's a real possibility.
Well, two words, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw it happen. And so I think that, the healing is going to have to begin on a local level. I think the healing can begin on a national level if you have a leader in place who actually is not stoking up resentment and white racial resentment the way Trump has. And it's not, like I said, it's not going to go away overnight when Joe Biden gets inaugurated. Like, white America is not going to suddenly go back to, all right, we're done with that. No, I think it's going to be like when Obama was first elected, where you saw, the Tea Party, the rise of the Tea Party, and people with guns and hanging him in effigy and burning him in effigy. I think you're going to have a lot of that still. I think we're still going to have a lot of anger from the far right part of America. But I also think that we outnumber them. That's what I believe in my heart, is that we outnumber them. And so, yes, they can be mad, but they're going to have to go back into their basement and be mad. They're not going to be able to go out into the Walmart and yell racist things at people anymore. That's what's going to happen. And so I think that's how the healing will begin. So that's my
wonderful.
2 cents.
Thank you so much, Susan
Thank you,
Davis.
Genetta.
Yeah, thank you. Susan Davis just said fantastic dialogue. Thank you, Genetta. Very insightful and wise. And thank you so much for your time and for being with us today. This was just a wonderful webinar, our very first. So thank you for kicking it off for us.
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate you guys having me here. And it's been, like I said, when Rita first asked me, I was like, okay, what am I going to say? And it's been, this has been a really great experience. And I appreciate you guys asking me, because I've had a really great time. I do enjoy having these kind of conversations, especially, like I said, with people outside my immediate sphere, because it's always good to get perspectives from outside your bubble. And that's why this is important. And I appreciate you guys asking me. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, don't estimate your ability at this. You were amazing.
Yeah, this was just great. It's a perfect format for you. So we really appreciate it. And I just want to thank everybody that came on to this webinar today. Just want to remind you, our next webinar will be October 14th, and our guest speaker will be Gina Saletti, who's running for Tony Durso's assembly seat. So please join us then. And if you're members that you haven't paid up your dues, it's time to please pay up your dues as well. We need it because, yeah, we don't have a lot, we don't have a very big budget, and we need the money really to advertise and try to get this message out. And if you have friends and family, please have them join us, do the actions, and keep fighting, moving forward so that we have an all blue November. So thank you again. Thank you, Genetta, again. It's been really a great pleasure and an honor to be with you today. And thank you all. And thank you, Executive Board. So have a good day, everybody.